am Ralph Johnson, and I am the immediate past president of the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education, better known as CAS. As we are approaching our 45th year of celebrating CAS existence, we thought it would be very helpful to capture some of the experiences of all of our living past presidents. And I'm so excited that we're having this conversation this morning with Don Creamer. And he's going to introduce himself and tell you about his experience as a CAS president. So Don, just give us a brief introduction, if you would.
Hello, everyone. I'm Don Creamer, and I had the privilege of serving as CAS president in the years 2001 to 2004. But I was associated with CAS from its beginning, and in fact, that might be the best place for us to start to get an understanding of what my role was during that time. I served as president of ACPA in 1978 and 79. If I'm not mistaken, the records show that CAS was begun in 1979.
That's correct.
Well, the way in which that came about was while I was serving as president, we came upon a document that had been prepared by a division of then APGA, American Personnel and Guidance Association. They have a different name now. But that division, it was the American Counselor Education and Supervision group. And they had created a document intending to become an accrediting agency for counselor education and supervision. When we looked at that document, it also included standards for accreditation for the college student affairs preparation folks. And I thought, and the people I consulted with thought that was wholly inappropriate. Mm-hmm. We didn't agree with those standards. The preparation of counselors and the preparation of administrators are quite a different thing, as a matter of fact. So out of concern for that, wondering what we could do about it, I got in touch with Ted Miller. Mm-hmm. And asked him to take the responsibility of pulling together a group of people from various associations to consider this matter. What shall be our response to this initiative by ACES? Okay. Well, Ted pulled together a group of a half a dozen or so people. I don't remember all of them, but they did include Bud Thomas from NASPA and Phyllis Mable, who is active in ACPA and NASPA, as a matter of fact. I don't remember all the others who were in that particular group, but they met, and the first decision they made was that accreditation practices, as we knew them, would be inappropriate for the preparation of college student affairs people. But they foresaw another alternative. But in the meantime, they took this document to the leaders of APGA. And their reaction was, if anyone is going to become an accrediting agency in this field, it's going to be the parent organization, not one of the divisions. And out of that concern, they created alternatively what is now known as CACREP, the Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs. Notice they still wanted that related educational programs in there. But then the second decision that group made with Ted and Bud and Phyllis was that there was an alternative, that we could create some sort of assessment process that would be much more appropriate to college student affairs than would an external accrediting agency. And as a matter of fact, I think cynically, some of the attitudes about that at the time were that a lot of counselor education programs were seeking accreditation in order to enhance their reputation.
Right.
Those programs that already had high recognition and quality weren't particularly interested in that sort of a process. But many student affairs preparation programs did say, yes, we would be interested in a self-assessment process. And thus, CAS was born. Ted and Bud and Phyllis were instrumental in holding the first meetings. And of course, you know the name of those. The CAS was called something different than it is now. It had the phrase of student development in it, and I remember that.
Okay.
And well, so at any rate, Ted and Bud and Phyllis, and then the idea was to get representatives from many other professional associations to come together to create these I don't know, standards of practice, I suppose. And so in the meantime, I was associated with them all through that process, but only joined CAS as a representative of ACPA somewhere in the mid-90s or something like that, as I recall. And then, of course, got roped into being the president shortly thereafter. But Ted was president of the original CAS for many years.
Right. I think about 10.
Yeah, or perhaps a bit more. And Phyllis then took over from him, but Ted stayed on the council, of course. And Phyllis was president for at least 6 years.
Correct.
So when I became president, one of the conditions of my being president was I told them I will serve for one term. I'm not Ted or Phyllis. And so, to my recollection, everybody since then has served a 3-year term. So at any rate, I was involved in a small way in the origin of CAS, and was fortunate enough to be a part of the hard work, around the turn of this century. So that's how I got involved with the organization. I just happened to be in a position where I could influence the use of resources and so on to get the right people together to make one of the really momentous decisions in our education, in my opinion, and that was the creation of a concept of self-assessment as an alternative, frankly, to accreditation.
But Don, you've given me so much information, and have you contextualized how this all started? And I don't think it was a small way, there was a significant contribution, and we want to thank you for that. So it seems as though CAS has adopted this philosophy of self-assessment from its incipiency from the very beginning. Why is that so important?
Well, because it was new, and it was a legitimate way for organizations to improve themselves in the context of some recognizable standards. By the way, let me tell you another interesting story.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I've got things I want to talk about this approach is really a way of quality assurance.
Right.
So organizations adopting their own concern for quality assurance. You may remember that Roger Winston and I wrote a book on staffing practices in higher education and college student affairs. And one of the things we learned, of course, from the big survey and a lot of interviews was that supervision was very weak or non-existent in many organizations. And so the quality assurance was really porous in a lot of these organizations. Well, at any rate, at some point, Ted Miller and I made a proposal to the European Educational Research Association that I happened to be active in at that time. And we went to Prague to a conference there. And we had a prepared presentation about the self-assessment process and so on, as in self-regulation. And we thought we had a totally unique approach to quality assurance.
Right.
Well, as it happens, our program was scheduled about, I'm going to say 2:00 one afternoon. And Ted and I went to the room where we were to present our ideas and listen to the presentation just before us. It happened to be a group of people from Scotland who were presenting their approach to quality assurance in college student affairs in higher education in Scotland.
Oh, okay.
Ralph, you could have used their overheads, and our overheads were interchangeable.
Wow.
We had, with this idea of self-assessment as a way of getting to quality assurance, emerged in at least 2 places in the world simultaneously.
Wow.
And we didn't know that until we went to Prague and sat down with those people and in Scotland to hear their approach. You know, most countries have a government agency that oversees the quality of higher education. I worked closely with the woman who was the quality assurance person in the Netherlands for many years. And but in this country, government that's not a government role. It's a role of accrediting agencies and for higher education institutions themselves. And so, at any rate, the idea of self-assessment and self-regulation emerged at the same time as it did in a government agency in Scotland, and I think we both could proudly say that it is a viable alternative to quality assurance. But at any rate, that's just another snippet from my fading memory.
Right. Well, you know, it's really interesting that you share that story, because you probably don't remember this, but I think around the year 2000, there was a quality assurance conference at Oxford that you and your wife attended, and I was at that conference with you all as well.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. We did. We did 2 or 3 conferences in Oxford. That was another moment I had forgotten about temporarily, Ralph. Well, that's interesting to know that you were there. And did you find some good beer to drink while you were over there?
I passed on that, but I certainly enjoyed the original scones. They were quite delicious.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Let me ask you this question, Don. Why were CAS standards and SAGs pivotal in the student affairs community as they were emerging during your time in involvement of the organization?
I'm not sure I would use the word pivotal.
Okay.
Pivotal suggests to me some sort of monumental, sudden change. There's no question about what these standards came at a very important time, and a part of that time was, I've already mentioned, I think those of us who were looking at the national status of college student affairs had some concerns. And as I said, Roger and I actually did a lot of research and writing on that subject. But why was it important at that time? That's hard for me to answer, but I think it's fair to say that the status of college student affairs in institutions was not universally respected.
Right.
And that this was a process that allowed these divisions to demonstrate their quality, and also to focus themselves on student development and learning, instead of just providing services without any particular meaning. My impression was that this gave an opportunity for organizations to argue that their activities were intended to promote student learning and development. And so having some sort of national standards that they could adhere to gave them credibility and, I hope, effectiveness. But that's a hard question for me to answer. I really am not certain. I think CAS's involvement has been incremental, and rather than sudden, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right, I understand. And maybe pivotal wasn't the exact word, but I do realize, and we all realize, how critically important it was for CAS to emerge at the time that it did. And as I recall some of the conversations that were happening, as I read about them as I was coming into the field myself, is that we really wanted to create a professional experience within student affairs. Professionalization of the field was critically important. And I know that there were a number of things that individuals and organizations were doing to make sure that it was solidified in that professional setting in order for that credibility to be universal. So I think what you just said is in line with the conversations I've heard about relative to how student affairs emerged and matured during that period of time specifically.
Yeah.
Do you recall any of the standards that you might have worked on when you were on the board or the council?
Well, I saw that question in your note, and I got a snicker out of that, because what was going, you remember now, CAS is just getting its footing.
Right.
And they had a lot of organizations had joined, and they had written standards for self-assessment. And about the time I came along, many of those same organizations were rewriting those things.
Right.
They were updating them. Now, partly because we spent a lot of time updating like the general standards, as I recall. And we were, when we met, we were often looking at, I don't know, 8 or 10 different standards sequentially, but the meetings were just occupied with 40 some odd people thinking they were editors. We would just shake our heads at our own process, like, what are we doing?
Right.
This is crazy. It took for hours sometimes to settle on a sentence. But I don't. So that's my recollection. We were just flooded with drafts of documents that we were trying to approve, and they came from literally when I left that organization, there were more than 40 organizations and we had had the standards written for each of those. That took a lot of patience and editing.
This is not a question that I sent you, but it just is one that I'm thinking about now. You mentioned that when you left, we had over 40 organizations. So
Yeah.
within a short window of time, we went from the initial, what, 7 or 8 to over 40.
Yeah.
Why do you think there was such growth in the numbers of organizations joining CAS within a short window of time?
Well, I can only guess that it offered legitimacy and I don't know, kind of purpose to a lot of organizations, a lot of units with the college umbrella. It's just amazing to me that if you think about what is a college or university, the first thing that comes to your mind, well, they're teaching faculty members. And then, of course, everybody knows there's some high muckety mucks who are presidents and vice presidents and things of that sort. What most people don't realize is in between those two levels, there are hundreds of people doing important work, often mandated by some government agency without funding, as a matter of fact. But
underscore.
every one of those organizations were seeking legitimacy within the context of, what is a college? Well, it's faculty members. Well, so who are all these people doing all these essential jobs, but who are not recognized as primarily as educators? And that concern of CAS, as I recall, we were feeling like we had not properly defined what we were talking about when we talked about student learning and development.
Right.
Exactly what do you mean by that? Well, as a matter of fact, when I was finishing my term as president, I supervised a doctoral student of mine, Terrell Strayhorn.
Right.
And he wrote the first document. I don't know, what is it? Is it called Student Learning and Development Outcomes or something like that?
I think it's what we still call the FALDOs, Frameworks for Assessing
That's right.
Learning and Development Outcomes.
That's right. That's the one. I'd forgotten the exact name of that. But at any rate, we presented that document to CAS and it was adopted. And as a matter of fact, shortly after I left the presidency, or actually it was, I guess, in probably 2005 or 6, I retired in 2005 and I walked away from higher education. But the one thing I did was CAS was wanting to do a workshop on that, what you call FALDOs. And as it happened, I was about the only person and my doctoral student who could, kind of lead that. And so Jan Armenio, as I recall, had also joined after we presented the total document. She added some. I mean, she did a lot of editorial work, I think, and things of that sort. But I don't remember exactly, except that she was involved in the final production of that document. But that's another. I don't know whether to call it a contribution or meddling that I was involved in at the time that I was working with CAS. But like I said, when I retired in 2005, I pretty much just walked away from higher education, and I've spent the rest of my time getting involved in the community here, and I've not continued in any kind of a professional role with higher education.
Well, we really appreciate your willingness to come out of retirement, per se, to participate in this very important project that we're doing. I'm curious to know, are there any other particular highlights or things that you experienced when you were president that you'd like to share with us?
Well, maybe one thing, Ralph, all during my involvement with CAS, I was consistent, I think, in talking about quality assurance as being what we're really all about.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote more than one, I think, but I remember at least one white paper, kind of a policy paper, that I tried to sell to at least NASPA and ACPA as a way to get them to focus in their entire organizational structure on the matters of quality assurance in student affairs. And I think we had a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations and a lot of agreements and some disagreements. There was similar meetings within the CAS structure where we debated the concept of quality assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least that's what I thought this was all about. And I got people to listen to me for a while. and then fortuitously, they got rid of me. So, but that's one other thing, I guess one other blight on the history that I was involved in.
Well, I know that you said that you basically walked away for a period of time and focused on some other things. And you may not have kept up with all of the transitions that CAS was making over the years, but we certainly have made tremendous strides relative to the process that we use now to update standards. You'll be happy to know that we're not locked in a room anymore for 4 or 5 hours over a sentence. There are many things that we've done differently. But as we begin to wrap up this interview, I'm wondering if you have any ideas or thoughts on what you would hope to be the future of CAS.
Well, I guess I would always I come back to the same things. I think that CAS concept of self-assessment and evaluation is important.
Right.
It's worthwhile. And now how to instill that in all of the structures of higher education is a matter of great importance, I think. And anything CAS can do to spread the word and to instill these practices in all of higher education, the more likely we are to have some kind of internal quality assurance to offer to the public.
Is there anything that I did not ask you that you wished I had relative to your involvement with CAS, your perceptions of CAS, or higher education in general, and student affairs specifically?
No, nothing comes to mind, Ralph. I would only underscore the fact that at least during my time and shortly thereafterwards, the people that I knew who worked with CAS and who assumed leadership roles within CAS were some of the top professionals in the field of that time. So CAS has been able to attract the very best professionals in the field to sit at the table and concern themselves with self-assessment and self-regulation. And it's to be congratulated for that, for attracting the very best, I think, in student affairs leadership to that council.
Well, thank you for that, Don. We really appreciate those words. We know that Ted Miller served as the first president, and then Phyllis Mable followed him. We appreciate the fact that you took the baton from Phyllis and you served admirably and passed it on to Jan Arminio, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
And
correct.
so that foundation has been tremendously helpful for CAS. And as we're celebrating our 45 years, we wanted to make sure we honored each of you for the work that you did and the legacy that you created. And I want to thank you again for coming out of retirement to participate in this. And I also want to thank you, and by the way, Dan Bureau, because when I was about to step into the role of president, you may recall, Dan surprised me in his last meeting. He invited all of the living past presidents into a Zoom meeting that I was not aware of, and surprised me. And each of you were there, including you. And I was completely overwhelmed with that, because it was a wonderful welcome into this role, and to hear the insights that you all shared and the encouragement you provided really helped me as I moved into this role and served for my 2 years. And we're now at a 2-year tenure. I think we
You've
finally
grown
got
up.
some sense and realized that a 3-year and more and beyond tenure might be a bit much. And so we now have, we actually served 4 years, president-elect, 2 years as president,
Sure.
and past president. Tenure
Yeah.
now. But your legacy and your involvement are truly, truly appreciated. And on behalf of the current leadership, our current president, Dr. Gail Spencer, and all of the members of the CAS governing board and the council, I want to thank you for being a part of this experience. And these interviews will be placed on our website for individuals to watch and enjoy for generations to come. So thank you again, and appreciate you, man, so much.
Thank you, Ralph. I enjoyed it. It was fun.
All right, take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.